Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our waning coverage here at the 2024 Fouke Monster Festival in Fouke, Arkansas. We have the pleasure of being joined by former folklore professor Marvin Leeper. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here. I'm so pleased that you asked me to.
Oh, man, I loved your presentation a couple years ago when you got up and talked. That's the first time that I met you, was in the building across the street. You gave a great presentation today. You for years taught folklore,
Yes.
and
Yes, I did.
taught these concepts, and it's something that we talk about regularly on the show. We were just talking with Ryan Edwards about it a while ago, that people like Adam Davies, before they go out in the field, folklore is where they start.
Yes.
He's like, if I don't have stories from tribes, from local people, things like that, telling me this thing has been there since before modern recording, I don't start.
Exactly.
And from there, if those stories don't have a basis like, hey, this forest could support it, this water could support it, what have you, then we have no expedition. So it all starts with folklore. It all starts with the story.
If you remember Anna Nakaris, the anthropologist on Bigfoot, the Definitive Guide, she stated that she never goes looking for an unknown primate without that folklore of the indigenous peoples in the area to begin with. And then, as you said, and as I said in that presentation you're talking about a couple of years ago, we have to do the research on the research.
Yeah.
We have to look for justification. Okay, there are stories that have existed for X amount of years. That's great. That gives us a place to start. Then we have to do exactly what you said and look at the habitat. Could habitat support a creature like this? And then in the folk study, and I had an interesting time selling that curriculum to the Board of Regents.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yes, and I found a book by John Bertrand, who was a member of the American Folklore Society, more or less wrote the Bible, that there are three basic methods of folk study: the materialistic, and the footprints fit that, something tangible we can touch.
Yeah.
There's the oral tradition, which are the stories that have been passed down for X amount of years.
Yeah.
And then we have ritualistic study, which is the Bukwas dance, the cave paintings, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised and pleased, of course, to learn that this actually does fit legitimate folk study. So I presented, I think I wrote up about 3 pages.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the things we were speaking about with Ryan Edwards earlier is the idea that, you know, when you start looking, especially across the globe, there are familiarities through so many of these stories, especially once you start talking Sasquatch and paranormal, the modern phenomena that's happening of, hey, I saw a portal open up in the woods and a Bigfoot walked out. Or I was standing there and Dogman popped up and then he disappeared into smoke. A lot of these stories have very much the same echoes of fairy, things like that, and even a lot of the warnings of tribes whenever it comes to interact, because it's not like they said like, oh, these things exist. There are some tribes that say like, oh, these things came to our ceremony regularly. Oh, we had trade with these things. Whatever you do, kids, if they offer you a salmon, don't go in the woods with them. You know, and very much, once again, akin to those stories of fairies, things like that, where it's like, notice this, but beware this. And those behaviors seem to be very similar.
They, indigenous peoples especially, per tribe, have different views and takes on what Sasquatch may or may not be. And for instance, in Oklahoma, as I said in the presentation earlier, as early as 900 AD, the Caddo Nation were telling of tales of these things who were giants, cannibals that preyed upon their women.
Yep.
Then in other tribes, they're benevolent forest protectors. So it's interesting from place to place to look at the cultural differences on their take, their perspective of this collective creature. But they all contain the same elements which we discussed earlier that we can study. And in the oral tradition, they are often cautionary tales or there's a moral behind them. So Claude Levi-Strauss said that the really real was what our perceptions of reality, individual perceptions of reality, can be. So individually, those tribes, those cultures, would look at Sasquatch as per their needs. If they were using them in the oral tradition, and stories do change.
Sure.
The story of the LaFleur incident up in Oklahoma, to where one of these creatures was stealing corn from the cribs, I've heard 4 different versions of it. So in the oral tradition, it's like playing the game of telephone. You know, you can tell one person something, and by the time it gets to the end, it's changed and morphed. So there are different versions of the same tale being told over time.
Yeah, well, and you know, it's an example that we give regularly biblically.
Absolutely.
Is
Yes.
when you start looking at the mission. Once the apostles were given their mission, John says, you know, don't wear shoes, wear only the shirt on your back. You know, James says, hey, wear only the sandals on your feet and bring a walking stick. Same exact story, but it depends on who you're telling it to, because, well, Corinthians may not have had sandals.
And
these people may not have used walking sticks.
In the Synoptic Gospels, as you mentioned, there's that version of it. And then in the Gentile, you know, Luke, his version slightly differs.
Exactly.
But it's all the same message.
Yeah, it's all the same core message. It's all the same core belief.
Yes.
It's that this has been colloquially changed so that it makes sense to the localized people.
Exactly.
Now, when that starts happening, especially let's transport this concept of folklore, because so often, unfortunately, Marvin, I think we get stuck with the idea of folklore being antiquated, folklore being gone, being in the past.
But we're making folklore now.
Exactly.
Even today.
Yeah.
At this conference. In the future, this will be added to the lore.
Yeah.
So yes, we're making folklore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Precisely.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and even it's something that we brought up with Saffron Cannon, who's set up right down the road over there.
The artist.
Yeah. She did a whole book, 6 Feet Away, about the Fouke Monster and about her father's sighting of the Fouke Monster, you know, and how, hey kids, you shouldn't be afraid to have the experience of the Fouke Monster,
Right.
you know. And how do you pass that down? How do you make sure that these stories get passed down to the next generation, that they get carried on if you don't talk about them, if you're not willing to talk about them?
Because the primary vehicle for keeping these stories alive over the centuries has been the oral tradition.
Yeah.
Now we have social media and everything, and when we find these tales, we want to record them for posterity, as soon as possible by whatever media possible. And that will help in the preservation, but ultimately you're absolutely correct. It will be the oral tradition that continues to reflect these stories.
Yeah, precisely. Because come down to it, how good are books? How long do they last?
Yeah.
You know, like, unless we're carving it in stone or crystal or something like that, it's this that's going to carry it forward.
Yes,
It's the conversation.
And there you have the materialistic, carving it into stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. The oral tradition. And then, of course, the ritualistic, which, as we discussed, may vary from culture to culture.
Well, and, you know, that's something that specifically we get into regularly with our guest Keith Sealand, who works in the world of petroglyphs, and the idea that petroglyphs are different than rock art.
Well,
You know, rock art is a story. Like, hey, here's the hunt that we had 3 days ago. This was epic. Like, we got 3 days to get back to camp. Like, let's preserve this in the cave. Petroglyphs, however, are different because they're expressing a religious tradition. They're expressing a sacredness of a specific spot, and told in a totally different type of oral tradition.
Absolutely.
And carried forth in a different way.
And oddly enough, even though they change as well, we're talking about,
they evolve.
Those that are of the religious nature seem to contain the greater degree of continuity.
Yeah, precisely.
I found to be quite amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm in the midst of working on an album right now called Within the Rocks, and my whole concept was that these very common patterns that you see in petroglyphs, the square-shaped patterns, the sawtooth patterns, the waves, that these were actually drawn by synesthetics who
Absolutely.
who were drawing a representation of what they heard. Now, recently, I actively saw an article from Live Science. I shared it all over. Like, if you've been listening to any of the interviews I've been doing on shows about my new album, like, they've decoded the fact that some of these, specifically the square ones, are the drumming pattern. They're they have recorded, like, so this is the sacred spot, this is the ceremony spot, here's your drumming pattern.
Yeah.
Person, like,
Incredible.
Here's your actual musical notation to carry forth the ceremony.
Here's your sheet music.
Like, and when you look at them, like, if I'm an electronic musician, so I'm used to seeing waveform, like pulse rate of a square wave, boop, 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 boop. And yeah, it's the exact same thing if you're looking at drum tabulature.
That's incredible.
You know, and it's really interesting to see that, like, they took the effort to record, like, this is how you should drum at this spot.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that an
It's
incredible
beautiful
testimony
Yeah.
to the power? Yes,
and,
absolutely.
and the fact that it took us this long to decode it.
Yeah.
That, like, even tribal people there locally didn't remember.
And
that's what it was
another
for.
thing that you bring out there that's also quite interesting is the importance across cultures of the drum.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
Stonehenge.
Yep.
In the center, they would drum and reverberate off the hinges.
Absolutely. And the fact that that's something that I talk about regularly on my show is that ancient cultures had two things above us. Number one, they were way more connected with the earth and their surroundings. When the sun went away, you saw the Milky Way. You didn't just see a few select stars like you see now.
Right.
You saw the panoply of the beautiful creation up there. You were tied to that, Marvin. If you did not know when that star rose, you didn't know when to hunt. You didn't know when to plant.
Absolutely.
You didn't know when to reap. Like, your whole life revolved around the sun, the moon, and the stars. Even my grandparents grew up in rural Louisiana.
Did they plant by the zodiac signs?
Good. They planted by the season.
Yeah,
They knew by when things were coming around, and hey, that flower's coming up. Time to put something in the ground.
Right,
You know, we got about 2-3 weeks before rain starts hitting heavy. Like,
that knowledge, fortunately, still exists, but it's been lost.
it's in a farmer's almanac now. We've been collecting it for hundreds of years, since the days of Ben Franklin, and it's amazing to see, like, pretty funny. These native people knew this stuff a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they were
Absolutely.
making terra preta in South America and other parts of the world that's still better than our soil today, that is demineralized.
Absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
and so the fact of
The
these
rare
things being passed on are important. We have to keep the conversation going. I say it at the end of my show all the time, and you'll hear it in just a minute. Without the conversation, we stymie as humanity.
That's it.
If we
exactly.
aren't willing to meet somebody where they're at with the point of conversation, we're the ones with the problem.
Absolutely. We have to share knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, epistemology demands that we share our results.
The fact that you just said epistemology is what I love.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been quite impressed by this interview.
Well, thank you.
The
Thank
depth
you.
that you have put into this.
Well, it's the fact of, you know, I'm about the conversation, Marvin, and evidence is what exonerates you.
Absolutely.
Data is what we're after. We're after points of data to add to a data field. That's science. Once you lose the fact of points of data, now you're talking dogma.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer talking hypothesis, which is the basis of science. If you aren't thinking outside of the box, you got a problem, scientist. That's part number one, is hypothesize. Think the craziest thing you can.
Yeah, you can
Now experiment, poke and prod, move to theory.
Null or reject. Accept.
Through
whatever.
further poking and prodding and experimentation, that theory will become law. Like, that's how science works.
And that is an approach I've noticed with, like, Ryan's presentation, that
I love that kid.
Younger people are going into it with more of that mindset, and older folks like I are sometimes. No, I'm not myself. Obviously, haven't been in academics for years, but older people are less. They're reluctant to accept new methodology. And that's what the future is all about.
Yeah. The example that I give all the time is I turn 50 in a year. When I walk into a Knights of Columbus Hall, to hear people go, "Oh, look at that young buck. Make sure to buy him a beer so he sticks around." I'm not the demographic you should be searching for, man.
Absolutely.
You need Ryan's age. You need 23, 25-year-olds to have the verve of this to carry it for the next 30 years.
You've got it by the tail.
Because like he said, the lowland gorilla was talked about. We didn't discover it till 100 years later. The modern version of Sasquatch that we know of is less than 70 years. We still have a 30-year gap till that point of discovery. We've got to be willing to have the conversation.
I think awareness is, or lack of awareness perhaps, is probably the culprit in acceptance. But you're absolutely right. If we don't have that conversation, then how can people...
It'll be too late come time for the conversation,
yes.
you know? And conservation is a prime example. You know, like
absolutely.
We tried screaming conservation back in the 70s, save the wetlands, save the mountain lands, things like that. What do we have now? Grizzly bears in apartment complexes, coyotes in cities, cougars roaming around in the back alleys of L.A., you know? How long before it's a Sasquatch digging through your neighborhood dumpster?
Absolutely.
Because you've encroached on their land.
And there are tons of stories of just such that.
Exactly.
You know, and as a matter of fact, there is a state park in Oklahoma. The curator there won't tell anybody that his own personal belief about what's going on, but privately he'll say, "Yeah, we call them park squatches."
Yeah.
And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because they dig through the cans like the bears."
Yeah.
And I
It's
said,
easier.
"Really?"
It's easier.
And he said, "Yeah." He said that he hears the slamming of a large dumpster quite regularly and noticed it's been rummaged the next day.
Wow. Incredible.
There are just tons of stories like that.
Well, and without folklorists like you carrying those on to the next generation, carrying those on, it's hard to keep it moving, Marvin. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you
so much for passing on the ideas of folklore and the importance of it to next generations. It's absolutely essential.
And so might I add our podcast like this.
Thank you. Before we let you go, let everybody know where they can go to keep up with research, where they can go to find you, contact you, all that kind of good stuff.
I am currently without social media.
No problem with that.
I'm working through jerryhestan.com.
Okay.
And Jerry's going to be adding new content here in just a few days. We've been on several missions.
Cool.
And we're going to be adding some new content to Jerry's page. And my Folklahoma YouTube will be announced on jerryhestan.com.
Awesome.
We're going to try to have that thing up and going by June.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, once again, thank you for taking the time in this waning coverage that we have here at the Fouke Monster Festival. Greatly appreciated. It was great to sit down and talk with you this year.
Yes, sir. It was a wonderful experience in my book as well, because it's nice to know that in social media there are level-headed people that are actually examining this from multiple facets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different viewpoints.
Absolutely.
So
Most
thank
definitely.
you.
Thank you. While you were online checking out all of the amazing work of Marvin Leeper, everybody, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can like, follow, subscribe, share, comment. That's where you can find all of the video channels of our guests at CuriousRealm.com/video, as well as all of their books, videos, and classes at CuriousRealm.com/store. While you're checking that out, if you are a Roku user, make sure to download the all-new Curious Realm Roku app. That's where you can catch all the shows. That's where you can catch awesome binaural beat and meditation music made by me. And don't forget, we are now officially carried by Ground Zero Media, Aftermath Media, Ground Zero Radio, as well as KGRA, KPNL. And thank you to Always Press Record Productions for helping us make our app. Thank you so much to the Fouke Monster Festival for having us out, as always. This officially wraps our coverage of the 2024 Fouke Monster Festival here in Fouke, Arkansas. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Remember, stay curious, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and remember that without the conversation, we do not move forward as humanity. We just spin wheels. So take care of yourselves and each other, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. To download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault, or become a sponsor of Curious Realm, visit our website at curiousrealm.com. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast and video services, as well as KPNL Radio, APRTV, and the Curious Realm app for ROKU devices. Curious Realm is a proud member of the Ground Zero Media and Aftermath Media family of podcasts. For more great shows and members-only content, visit groundzeromedia.org and aftermathmedia.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. And remember, the other side is always watching.